Calling to order the Affordable Housing Trust meeting for May 6th, 2025. This meeting is being recorded and recorded. If anybody else is recording, they should let us know. Okay, so I guess the first order of business is to take a look at our minutes from April 2nd of last year. Affordable Housing Trust does not meet very often, clearly. Does anybody have any adjustments to minutes? Kathy?
My name is Miss Val. Thank you for catching that.
Okay, barring that one minor detail. Does
I
anyone
make a
have
motion
any
to
others?
approve the amendments as amended.
Second. Excellent. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I'll abstain because I wasn't present.
You don't have to, just so you know. Miles? I said I didn't need a printed copy, but in fact, only the agenda is available online. At this point, it seems to be. I know I read the whole thing earlier today.
I printed it from online. That's good.
I'm now getting exactly one page.
I can't hear.
From
But
there.
Yeah,
go down
yeah.
to the next item. That's just the agenda. The next item is the packet. Yeah, we'll happily bring it home.
Okay. No,
If you're in the committee.
it does say packets.
And before the three.
All right, and then there's one that says minutes. I can see if it's the minutes. No, That would not be it.
I'm sending to
You need it to.
Send it to me
I
too.
know I read
if
it
you will.
earlier
Because
today.
I read it
so-
mine earlier today, but I read it on my computer. I didn't realize I don't have it on here.
You're right,
This
I
is-
read it on my computer from Katie when my email still worked.
If you go to the.
Okay.
Town government committees. affordable-
Yeah.
It'll-
But he's
He's gonna send it to you.
just
That'll be.
sending it and that'll be faster. Okay, I have
Sorry.
it now.
I presumed it was. I presumed it was
Super.
here.
Did you send it to me?
Okay,
Yeah, I just sent it to you.
thank you. I'm
Who's
good.
iPad 5? I can.
Okay, so.
How do I don't even know how to airdrop, I'm sorry.
So the next thing on our agenda is the small repair grant program update, now that we all have. And you kindly sent me a note telling me who was gonna be doing this, so Allison.
Okay, hi, I'm gonna just present a brief overview on the financial aspects of the
your
program.
email.
Since the beginning of the program in FY twenty,
No, I can't get
the
that.
small repair grant program has,
I got nothing. Sorry, I'll just listen. I did read it, so.
well, here, you know,
I'm okay. I remember my comment that I have, so I'm fine.
oh, one comment that.
I have one that I need to make.
Okay, well, since FY twenty, when the program began, the program has issued a total of $194,747 in grants to 48 households, which have applied these funds, or at least some of the funds, to making health and safety improvements to their homes. At the time of the FY 25 allocation appropriation of $50,000, all but $5,250 had been allocated to grants. But clearly not all of the $194,747 has been spent. Most of the applicants with whom I spoke cited issues predominantly relating to the smallness of the grant and the difficulty of finding contractors willing to take on such a small job. They also had issues with, of course, given the pandemic, with supply issues and, of course, sometimes the difficulty of dealing with the town, most notably having to wait 30 days for payment, which is typical. And all of our vendors in general, I think, understand that. So what I have done over the past year is I've worked closely with a number of the outstanding grants and with both the homeowners and their contractors and tried to work them through the program. Some of that was successful, probably most were not. And for whatever reason, the grants were terminated, generally mutual agreement. But certainly they had exceeded the deadlines that have been imposed by the grants. So, as a result, I was able to identify $59,525 that had once been allocated but never spent. So that $59,525 is combined with the $50,000 allocation made in FY '25, plus the previously uncommitted funds of $5,250, for a total of $114,778 that is now available for disbursement. We've held off disbursement, in that time, it's given us an opportunity to figure out how we could improve the program, obviously we can't improve it in every area, but we have identified some notable areas that we can make more user-friendly and therefore hopefully more attractive to users. So we have a number of proposals to present to you. And if and when those are approved, then we will begin to proceed to open up the grant applications. So unless you have questions on the finances, I'll turn it over to Katie, who's going to give a brief overview of our recommendations.
Can I ask a
Sure.
question? So I want to make sure I understand. So it's not, there's always a delay between when the money's awarded and when it's spent. Because there's this reimbursement model, but also because the work has to get done.
Right,
Yeah. It, aside from the fiscal '25 money that hasn't been awarded yet,
right.
it looks like the prior years have all been awarded, right? Am I missing that?
No, we've received appropriations for every year except 21 from FY '20 to FY '25, $50,000 appropriations.
I'm looking, sorry, so I'm looking at the difference between the $250,000 appropriations and the 194 amount awarded. That's the $50,000.
Oh, right, okay.
So we've awarded, aside from fiscal '25, we've awarded everything.
All but
Essentially.
$5,000, yeah.
Yeah,
So basically, we really needed the $50,000 when we requested it last year. So, okay, did
Oh,
that
yeah.
answer your question?
well, yeah,
Okay.
so then my next question is, what specifically are the problems with the grant program? Maybe that's a lead in.
Oh, okay, so for one thing, it was started shortly before the pandemic. So any number of issues are related to that. If $5,000 home improvement, for those of you who've dealt with it, it's very small and contractors don't want to deal with it. It's not worth their time.
Particularly when
then-
when a lot of people were doing repairs over the.
That's
period
true
of-
too. There's a lot of demand for contractors, but I think most of the people I spoke to just said they couldn't find a contractor. Also, the town, they have to wait 30 days for payment. And that means sometimes fronting the cost of the supplies. We will not do that. We can't do that. So we're not, I mean, we're a government, that's just the way it is. We can't change that. And contractors aren't willing to do that. Other than that, I mean, there may be any number of personal reasons, but that's basically the issues that homeowners confronted.
Is there also an issue, I'm wondering, with the cap of $5,000? Is that another piece we need to talk about? Is this,
Well, I think Katie will get to that as well.
okay,
Right.
all right. And I don't think we've thought about, is there a way that the town might be able to help source some vendors that we might be able to direct at this?
Well, in general, as a municipal employee, I've always been told never to make any recommendations for vendors. I mean, I don't think the town wants to assume any liability for recommending someone. And certainly not in this program. So, no, I deliberately don't do that.
Okay.
For one thing, I don't necessarily know their quality.
Mhm.
So, sorry, so I just want to understand, so you're saying the reason why the amount invoiced is less than the amount awarded is because some people who've been awarded grants have trouble finding vendors to get the work done.
Right. Over all the 48 grants that we awarded, 50 of that, 59, what was it? $59,000 was not spent.
Was that, was any of that like a just portion of the awarded amount that wasn't needed, that wasn't?
On a
invoiced,
few
or-
occasions, people either decided not to do all the work or it came in as a few dollars less. I mean, there was some few awards that had a small surplus.
But it was mostly
Big
all or
chunks.
nothing,
Yeah,
basically.
big chunks.
Okay,
And that included everyone from last June until the present, because I'm seeing 0 awarded in FY 24, or 0 spent, so.
It's overall history, as I.
From the
understood it.
beginning of it.
From the
when-
beginning.
in,
Okay, I'm just looking
FY
at the
20.
0 under FY 24, just looking at that year in particular, it looks like there was nothing that was spent for.
Well, what-
Last June through, would be this June, right?
Well, I've been here for a year and we haven't entered into any grant agreements.
Okay, okay,
Also, what the town accountant will invariably do is draw down on the older accounts first.
sure.
and so do you know of the 48 that were awarded, how many did not spend any?
I could tell you,
Yeah.
but I'd have to calculate it. I do know, let's see, one thing, there were 48 grants, 33 households, some received more than one grant. 35 grants were spent to some degree. 35 homeowners spent their grants, either totally or in part. And 13 grants were never touched.
Okay,
So I do have the numbers on that.
thank you. That's perfect.
And just, so we're clear, there's now no pending grants in
Nothing.
process.
Yeah.
We are just kind of at a pause point.
Right,
So.
so we can
that's-
start fresh.
Okay. Okay, if I want to-
Yeah, I guess, just. Has everyone who's received a grant who wanted to get work done it? Or,
Well, I think some still want to do it, but for whatever
but they
reason, they
can't, for one
can't.
reason.
I mean, and in some cases, they don't have enough money. I mean, they're responsible for, right now, anything over $5,000.
Sure, and so if there was something that they wanted to do. How long do they get to keep the grant? Like-
Under the current,
Well, yeah, like if the problem is that they're having trouble finding a contractor, how long do they have before the grant reverts or whatever happens?
well, the current grant agreements, or at least the old grant agreements, required that the work be completed within 1 year from the date of the grant. From the date of the award.
But in practice, we were not adhering to that because of
Right.
COVID.
Okay,
Yeah, we
And
may-
so there were some pending for years.
For years.
So,
okay,
so part of what this kind of pause point and having Allison dig into all of this was, we weren't adhering to that year because of the, circumstances. And so we had a lot kind of out there that we weren't sure kind of if money was gonna be freed up to be able to go back out to new folks or how that would play out. So
We
in the
did,
policy it was a year, but in practice, it had been just kind of a little bit open-ended.
we didn't terminate any grant within 1 year. We
Okay.
tried working with them. Didn't always work out.
all right, super, okay, yeah, anyone else have any questions on this section? All right, super,
Great. So in the packet, there's a red line version. That's probably the easiest to go through. So after Allison did all this, kind of shoring up of the grants and understanding where the hurdles were and the barriers, we went back to this grant protocol that the trust had approved in 23 to identify where changes would be helpful. So some of these are kind of technical or not substantive, so I'll just hit on the ones that are substantive. Under financial assistance, we are taking out in item 1, unless the homeowner fails to comply with the grant agreement, because we only pay upon compliant completion anyways. So there wouldn't be a circumstance where we, paid. And we're recommending taking out or selling or transferring the property within 1 year. Kind of, I think the intent of this was that somebody wasn't making an investment with town funds and then flipping their home. In reality, the investment is so low, and the circumstances where someone under this program is leaving their home is likely because they can no longer be there alone. Or something's happened with their health or something like that. So we just felt like it was time maybe to ask you to revisit that as a criteria.
Has that happened with any of the previous grants?
I don't believe
We don't check,
Checked.
we don't confirm. I mean, that was another issue too. I mean,
Yeah.
technically, the only way to enforce this is to put a lien on the property, which is obviously cumbersome. And I would have to check ownership at the end of every year.
And what, then you'd have to claw it back.
Yeah.
Correct.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for something less than $5,000.
Pretty think well intended.
Right.
When it was initiated, but.
Mhm.
Okay, item 2, Marion had raised this earlier. So we're recommending right now, the current program says $5,000 max per grant, but you could apply for a second grant and have a lifetime award of 7,000. What that means is if an applicant knows that they have a project between 5 and 7, we are requiring them to go through 2 application rounds and creating a double application for the applicant and for us in the process, as opposed to just saying, if we're comfortable saying each household has 7,000 at the max, why don't we just allow that in one grant cycle? If that makes sense. Somebody could still apply in multiple grant cycles if they have a project that's 2,500 and then they want to come back and apply for another 2,500, they still could do that. But if somebody coming kind of in the door the first time has something between 5 and 7, this would allow them to get up to 7 right away. I'll revisit the exception when we get to item 4. Item 3, I think is just a lot of clarifying language. If the project cost exceeds the grant, the applicant pays that difference. The town pays the contractor directly. And
Do
the
we,
last sentence restates what I just
do
said.
we know of the initial grants, how many grants were actually over the grant amount? Do we have a sense of that where?
I'd have to go through every invoice to see, well, I know the ones that reapplied for additional funds, but there are also some that, the project itself may have been over 5,000, they assume the responsibility for the
Responsibility.
excess. So that I
So we
would have to
don't
look
have
on the,
that necessarily captured.
only on
at
an
this
invoice,
point.
I'd have to go through all the invoices to find it. It didn't happen often.
It would be good just going forward to keep track of that. I think that would be helpful to know. You know, what kind of the average project costs.
In item 4, we're restating the cap at 7,000, but keeping an exemption in the program that the town manager in an emergency situation could basically waive this and extend an additional grant up to 7,000. This waiver provision had been in there previously for real health, safety, times of health and safety. There was an individual who couldn't be discharged from the hospital until a plumbing repair was done to their home. And we took them out of cycle because there was this waiver provision. So it's rare, but I think with this population, it certainly happens. We just want some flexibility.
Would they have to apply for that additional funds?
Yes, I believe when we did that one, we were working through the social workers in town and we had them kind of document the paperwork. But it was like an expedited application process, I guess I would say. So, moving on to page 2, under applicant qualifications, item 1, we're really just changing language so that we can have evergreen information get updated on the website as opposed to having to change the policy every year with the HUD numbers.
Although website links can go dead too.
Yeah, this one hopefully won't, but yes, great point. This is the standing page for the housing division. Changes in 2 are just technical in nature. Item 3, right now, the reference for what defines a disability just says state recognized. We thought referencing the ADA was a better, more concrete reference.
ADA is actually very liberal in terms of definition of disabilities.
And the deletions in item 4 reflects the same as I already discussed about not tracking if the home is sold within a year. Under the next section, eligible home improvements and contractors, item 3 is explicitly saying contractors have to submit a W-9 to the town. And that we pay them directly. I believe this used to be language reflected in the grant contract, but that meant applicants didn't necessarily know that until they got the award and then they were signing our grant agreement as opposed to us putting it here where it's up front. And then they're having that conversation with the contractor up front and them knowing to be a vendor in our system to get paid, you have to give us your W-9. And then under grant applications, item 2, this is a recommendation to change the process a little bit. Thus far, we've done 2 grant rounds per year. We do a finite grant round where there's a deadline, and then the previous community housing specialist would take all the applications. And if there were more requests than funding, the old program said that there would be a determination of kind of who was most in need. That in practice hasn't necessarily happened, and we've had a lot of discussions about if you meet the eligibility criteria, then how are we deciding who's more in need than the other, because you all meet the criteria. And so this recommendation is to switch to a rolling basis. We'll still twice a year promote the program and do kind of a comms communications push on it, but it would just be a rolling application, and as funds are available. And I think the intention, remind me, is that Allison could, if there was more applications than funds, we could keep a waiting list by who came in the door at what time, and then be able to still serve them, you know, when the next appropriation is available.
Is it more or less work to administer?
I'm sorry, more or less what?
Work to administer, it's on a rolling basis versus all.
I think it's easier. My main reason is to remove the subjectivity. I'm concerned about having to make choices between equally needy people.
Right.
So,
On the other hand, the choice is now whoever's faster gets priority.
I don't
To
know
an
that
extent, but
anybody
right
has
now we have enough
categories
money.
fast. That's the
But when
challenge,
somebody
but
came out
yeah.
of the hospital, discharged out of the hospital, could apply right away. And I think
that's right, they don't have to wait.
intuitively, people just say, is there a program, can I access it? Not like, there is, but you just missed a deadline, please wait 6 more months.
Yeah.
Right,
Exactly.
right.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, and it also means, yeah, that it's just harder for everyone, right? If you identify something and then you have to wait to apply and wait to hear, it just make it harder to use this money.
And
do we
remember to
usually
apply.
Fill
Yeah.
a roster?
I'm sorry.
Do we usually fill our roster at every application opportunity?
Well, I've never done one, but my predecessor, there was extra money. I mean,
Okay.
there was never an issue of having to,
So far. it
Right, so
hasn't been an
far.
issue.
but we're not dealing with the pandemic. We're dealing with other issues now, but we're
Yeah.
not dealing with the pandemic.
And Katie, this is something that the CAF is aware of and that the social workers at the hospital are aware of as alternative.
And then in item 5, the added language starting as staff may approve, this gets at us kind of revisiting the time frame for awards. I think we don't want to be in a situation where we're coming to you with projects that have been kind of in limbo for 3-4 years. We're out of the pandemic. So we discussed what timeframes do we feel are reasonable, and then do we want to really commit to just sticking to it? And so the recommendation is for that staff can approve a 6-month extension. Sorry, the default would be you get the grant and have to complete the project in 1 year.
Yeah.
Then staff can approve a 6-month extension if they think the request is supported by reasonable justification as to why time is needed. But then at the 18-month mark, there's no more discretion in it. The award would just conclude. And then we'd have kind of a date certain where we would know what money is coming back to the town to then redistribute.
Do they get some kind of written notice that their grant is gonna conclude? Cause
Yes, I've even been doing that.
it's
Yeah.
really tough to keep track of homes.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
projects. They sort of linger.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of handholding in this process.
okay.
so.
I think this is great. I just have 2 questions related to the last edit there. Staff, is that town staff? I don't know if we need to specify. Okay, yes. You may approve.
I think that was in like the preamble part.
Okay, so just whatever staff is referred, perfect. And then just if a project that is granted an extension is not completed within 18 months, the grantor will be rescinded and the household may not apply for a grant at the subject premises. Just wanted to see if that might be worth like related to that specific project, or is that like, if you don't get this done within 18 months, you can't ever apply for anything else?
Or if it's also excess grant funds, because presumably they may have spent some of them in 18 months. I guess
Oh,
any of the above could be true, right?
Yeah,
Well, if they only spend some of it, once the town issues a check, the grant terminates.
Yeah.
We will only issue 1 check per grant award.
Oh, so they just collect all their receipts, bring them in one batch.
Well, it's supposed to
Well,
be with one contractor. I think
contractor,
is what
one
it says
invoice.
in these,
Yeah,
you're working with one
Yeah.
contractor.
and we won't,
Well, but I thought we were talking about having to front the materials.
No,
So the homeowner can't front the materials.
No,
If the contractor,
yes,
because often the contractor
has to
does
do it.
not want to, so the homeowner might do it. So if that,
But we
receipt of
will not
materials.
reimburse the homeowner.
oh, okay,
The homeowner can't get involved, right? There's no W-9.
We,
for the
right, we
homeowner.
cannot, and plus, if we do pay a homeowner, if we were to do so, they would have to declare it as taxes.
okay.
This is these, some of the
It's
issues we were
complicated,
trying to, yeah.
All right. I like it.
So in terms of addressing the problems, you got the $7,000 instead of 5. Is there anything else in here that addresses the issues of contractors who don't want to do this work, other than raising the amount?
One thing that, one thing we are incorporating, and it's not necessarily in this text, but I've drafted a set of instructions or an explanation to the contractor. Right now, the onus has been on the homeowner to explain things to the contractor, and they didn't always do it.
Okay.
So there's a lot of frustration in that. So we will require that both the homeowner and the contractor sign. And the contractor will understand that the contractor will be paid once upon satisfactory completion of the work, has to provide a W-9, and he'll have to wait up to 3 months, 1 month, because that's the town's procedures.
Yes, well, that should help though, because some of it, I was thinking, like, I can understand that the contractor doesn't want front for the material. But on the other hand, if they know that the homeowner has this deal from the town's gonna be good for it, so having something
Right.
written. You know, they know they will get reimbursed
Right.
from the town, whereas the homeowner. You know, maybe not as reliable
Right.
and they might want more upfront, so.
Although technically, the vendor can't come after the town, because we have no legal
No,
responsibility.
but I don't mean legally, but they,
Yeah,
you know, would know that the town has the
Mhm.
wherewithal. You
right,
know, if the town has committed to paying $7,000 or whatever it is.
right.
That the town would pay.
And I've had these conversations with contractors, because they say, where's my money? And because they were never, it was never explained to them completely. And that's just too much to ask for some of these homeowners.
Yeah.
So,
Who judges the work he's done
the
satisfactory?
homeowner, it's their house, it's their responsibility.
Okay.
I think it makes sense, like it makes it administratively easier. It functions better. How does it help the 13? The example, the 13 grants that were never funded, does it? I don't know.
Well, maybe if they fully understand everything that's involved,
Yeah.
they don't buy. Or if there's $7,000, maybe it makes it easier for them and they don't have to front some money.
Yeah.
And it may not help everyone.
Yeah.
But to the extent that we can make it more user-friendly. And try to explain things, hopefully it will help. And I should say that the social workers have been phenomenal. I mean, they help a number of these people, and we communicate, we try to work with the people to get them through the process. In general, they're terrific, they help me with housing, so.
Okay, so,
You need a motion?
yeah, I was just gonna say, we are to, vote these changes today. Yeah, so a motion would be great.
Madam Chair, make a motion to accept the revised policy.
Second.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. None opposed. So, great.
Just one more question.
Hmm.
So if there are $114,000 remaining, when do you anticipate requesting top up more funds for the program?
Well, we're gonna spend 114,000 first, I imagine next
Yeah, yeah,
fiscal year, we'll be coming for more money, hopefully.
But you think you can spend all of that in 1 year?
Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Right.
If I could just add, I think there'll always be, because of when we need to submit our budgets into the cycle, there'll always be outstanding money out there. So I don't think we can spend fully down and then apply without there being a lag in the program available to the residents. So there'll always be that overlap.
And forgive my ignorance here, is there another appropriation that's up for meeting or up for vote at town meeting or not?
No, we
Okay.
didn't submit for 26.
Okay.
I'm gonna take the next piece,
Please,
okay?
yeah.
So, the board and the trust, excuse me, a memo on April 11th. And, I based most of the memo on the work that the, League of Women Voters had done, so, we have members here. And can answer any questions that the board might have about those recommendations, but, I'll walk through them if it makes sense. The board did adopt a goal, to evaluate the role of the Affordable Housing Trust, so that is the reason that we put together the memo. Trust was created in 2017 and has primarily looked at the small repair grant program and then worked with the ERIP emergency
Rental
rental-
assistance.
thank
program.
you. ERAP. And also lots of work on the ground in planning and community development on recertification of people in affordable housing units. So to go through the recommendations briefly, I'll just highlight what we've recommended, that I think it's really important that when we reconstitute the trust, that one of their first goals be to develop a priority list and work plan of what they think they should do. We think that they are, and then the housing plan that the community adopted 2022. That had recommended that the Affordable Housing Trust would be a good body to really look at the town's progress towards that. I will say, I read the plan again in preparation for this memo, and two of the highest priorities were to really move the Linden Chambers project forward and to create housing for people with disabilities. And so that's sort of on the warrant for tomorrow. So that's just, I think really positive. So monitoring that plan, there's a lot of recommendations and a lot of assigned items to boards that the trust could do. Defining low and moderate income households on the as up to 110% AMI, I think the trust could do some research on that and make recommendations. With respect to the trust document, we are recommending that it remain at 7 members, but that we change the structure where it's the 5 select board members, the town manager, and an at-large member. Statutorily, the town manager has to be on, so that leaves you 6. We're recommending that we have a member of the select board, somebody with expertise and experience in actually fundraising and development, because we'll talk about that being a priority for the trust. Somebody with expertise and experience in affordable housing development, including different forms of subsidies, because we've all learned a little bit about affordable housing funding in the last couple of years. One person with experience in residential real estate, and then 2 members at large who have an interest in housing. This is quite a challenge of what the trust might be taking on, so it's really important that it be people who have an interest in the subject matter. One of the items that we was suggested actually by Josh in response to this memo is a recommendation that the members appointed by the select board be Needham residents, and so that's something the board can consider. I think it makes some sense. It's not in this version, but I wanted to raise it. The trust document currently says 3-year terms, but the statute says 2-year terms, so we have to make that change. And we can go at the end, we can go through the couple of other changes that are in the trust document.
Kate, I'm presuming all of these members are appointees by the select board?
Yes.
Okay,
Except the town manager.
except the town manager. It just doesn't say that explicitly, I don't
Yeah,
think.
that's a
but-
good point. It doesn't.
In 3.3.
In the
To-
trust,
Select board, well, in the draft, the select.
in the
board-
draft document, it's in there.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
Sorry.
Since we're talking about this, I had a question about the composition. One of the things I noticed in the league report, looking at other towns, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, I'm thinking we probably considered it and rejected it as an idea for some reason, but in some other towns, they will have a CPC member or a planning board member designate on their affordable housing. And I noticed we don't have that, so I just was interested in the pros and cons of that, or have we thought about that, or? I don't have a view, but I'm just saying I noticed other,
I had thought, I kind of thought there might be a conflict. If planning board member was on this, and then the project came before planning board, it'd be kind of like. You have 2 feet in 2 different places.
Yeah, we were thinking that divesting the trust of elected officials or people on a lot of other boards could really get the trust to focus on one area. And if the planning board is just gonna, I don't mean just, but if the planning board were to have a candidate, I mean, we're all working from the same pool. That's what we were thinking. There's no voting tonight, so we could certainly keep that in, but it really was to take it out of the realm of people who are already on a lot of other committees. And as Josh points out in the draft, and in both documents, the old trust and the new trust, under 3.3, it says that the select board will appoint. That's clear in the document. One of the recommendations is to provide town staff. We do have our part-time community housing specialist, there's a lot of other jobs, but it will, the trust, when it creates its work plan, if it believes it needs additional funding, then that would be an opportunity for it to do that. And we also think that the trust should review whether direct appropriation from the CPC is something that they should seek. But I think that developing the list of priorities and funding targets that they're trying to get to might help in that application to the CPC. There are certainly communities, and I think this was in the League's report, that as much as the entire housing bucket is appropriated to the trust, essentially to say, there's all these housing needs, the trust, the housing committee should do it, and the CPC who's struggling to look at all these other things. I'm not suggesting that, but that is out there. That maybe there's a funding target of some portion of that housing money that could go to the trust, because we are, as you've seen in prior meetings, we're bringing in revenue in terms of recertifications in the, thousands.
Monitoring.
In the single thousands, so the trust doesn't have a lot of funding at this point. The trust, as I say, may have other budget requests. Hopefully they, we can have people who have expertise in helping us find other funding sources. One of the recommendations of the League is this real estate transfer fee, so maybe there's some research the trust can do on that, but I think that would be a recommendation to the policymaking boards in terms of state legislation. We do think that the trust should be actively participating in the Stephen Palmer reuse project, to the extent that the members of the trust think that one of the uses of the Stephen Palmer project could be housing, and so if the trust wants to make that case, then they should be participating. We're hoping that the trust members will do some research to leverage other sources of funding, so maybe leverage the CPC funding by bringing in revenues from other sources. Perhaps creating fundraising targets. Work with the planning department and the planning board on measures that could be included in the zoning bylaws that could increase affordable housing. Potentially looking at the impact of local preference, that's something that the League came up with as well. And then I think the most important thing, again, to reiterate, is that we think the first step should be a work plan, and then perhaps talking to the relevant boards who have an interest in this matter about what that work plan is before moving forward towards that work plan. Just to reiterate the changes that we're proposing in the trust, I can create a red line version, but when you change fundamentally the numbering scheme, the red is so much that I will highlight for you. We've moved, instead of letters, to a numerical approach. We've changed the terms from 3 years to 2, changed outdated terms. It was in 2017, we were still a board of selectmen. The composition as recommended in the recommendations is included in the trust for consideration, and there's some clarifying language. The one other item that was raised was whether the document should include specific language relating to being the ability of the trust to loan money, and this has been a topic of conversation. Section 4.3 says that the trust has the full powers of, General Law, Chapter 44, Section 55C.
Mhm.
Section 4 of that statute authorizes the trust to execute, acknowledge, and deliver deeds, assignments, transfers, pledges, leases, covenants, contracts, promissory notes, the loan, releases, grants, grant agreements, and other instruments, sealed or unsealed, necessary, proper, or incident to any transaction in which the board engages, or meaning the trust in this case, for the accomplishment of the purposes of the trust. So town council was comfortable if you wanted to add that specific language. We do enumerate some of the other sections of the statute in the trust document, but not all of them. So that was a question as to whether the board, the trust wanted to do that.
There's also language in here that says that if I understand it correctly, that the trust could not lend beyond the assets that they already have.
80% of the assets.
Yeah.
Which section is that? Is it-
And just the town is not held responsible, right?
4.2.2.
Which point?
4.2.2.
So. Okay,
That's
that's to
incurring that,
borrow,
yeah.
that's for the trust to borrow money. But you're talking about the trust lending money.
That's it. Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning. Because I mean, I didn't know, I had to ask about whether it was allowed in that. I mean, rather than look for a state law,
Mhm.
maybe easier just to make.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly been a conversation by the board to talk about it in your goals. It makes sense that
Yeah.
if
This
it's
would be
allowed,
the
it should be.
mechanism.
this should
Yeah, I
be
mean-
the place to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd want to make it as flexible as possible, and then the trust can decide what's appropriate for a particular project or whatever.
But the trust goes beyond being a granting authority to being a bank. I mean, what are they? Right, so where's the oversight coming in?
Well, likely the community. The town finance community housing oversight committee.
But we would need to reference that, right?
It's clear in the charge
Is
that
TCHOC
it doesn't only apply to housing authority, it's all community financed housing.
is TCHOC a standing committee, a permanent committee?
Well, it's
Or is
a
it
select
just-
board goal committee, yeah.
Okay.
It's not an ad hoc.
Yeah, I would want, I'm cautious about that. I'd like, what are we getting into? Because I just for oversight, control, financing.
I think what we've recommended to the board is that in your goal setting process, you adopt a goal to research what
Yeah.
all the risks and benefits are of lending money through the trust.
Okay,
Sure. Because we haven't done it, but certainly other towns do.
yeah,
Whether it's exercised,
yeah,
maybe worth listing it as an option because it's easy to forget if it's buried in a state law.
I mean, the risk of lending money is less than the risk of granting it in a sense that when you grant it, it's gone, right? When you
Right.
lend it, you're hoping that some of it will come back.
Well, except that if you grant it with restrictions like the CPC does, then maybe it doesn't get granted. Like if the project's a bust, if we're
That's
the
true.
last ones in, then our grant comes back to us, whereas if it's a
Well,
loan,
we
perhaps.
never, we never get it, right? Then we
Right,
don't-
exactly. So
Right.
but so I guess it would depend on how the loan
That's
is
true.
structured,
That's
because
true.
that might go out the door and.
And that's one of the
Good point.
reasons, one of the things I think we need to study is there a way to achieve that kind of certainty that it
Yeah.
won't get spent if the project doesn't move forward,
Right,
if you have a
I
loan.
think no one's comfortable with it going out the door, frankly, but
Yeah.
that's a discussion for another day, but I think.
But if you can guarantee that and you can get some of the money back, it can be redeployed for more projects in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that part is good, but so long as we can also still do it on some basis where we know it's being actually used for what we want.
Other towns do this, so.
Yeah, no, we'll have to
Yeah.
figure it out.
I was gonna ask if, did we have any other towns that we considered best practices who were a basis for some of this, or is that for modeling the new trust?
So
Yeah.
really, the only
Yeah,
change in
the league provided,
The
so-
league did, yes. The only change really that we're recommending is reconstituting the membership. So we didn't do a
But
lot
none
of
of the
independent
others at
analysis.
this point, okay.
I will say that the limited amount of work I did to think about your goals for next summer is that the grant amounts are not in the millions. They're not the same kind of, even if they're doing loans, they're not in that same ballpark of grant, so of loans, so. But they may be out there. I only.
So we're saying that we're gonna, our plan is to reconstitute the board and then allow that board to develop the work plan that would touch on all of these things, bring it to the select board to be approved or.
But do we approve, or is it trust to trust? It does with, do we control the trust, or does the trust control itself?
The trust control itself.
Nonetheless, if they want money, that's where we come in. Because they can do whatever they want, but they're not gonna get very far without money.
Well, there
And
is,
so then, for
Well, but-
example, it would have to be CPC or, but obviously if they were able to fundraise, but again, reading the league report. It maybe will be much more amazing than everyone else. I would like that to be, but it didn't seem like there was huge money raising going on. Like, wealthy people donating their $30 million estates to the housing trust, like,
Occasionally that happens.
yeah, that would be nice. But it's not something we can really count on, so I think a lot of the money sources would be us. Is that right? CPC.
Yeah, but
CPC,
but I guess that makes me a little bit anxious about the whole lending business, like if they're not. Reporting through the select board or somehow through the town, that makes me a little loath for them to become the lending authority.
Is it
Yeah.
Because
worthwhile
it's the
to have a
town's, it's the
provision?
town's reputation, I mean, not
Yeah,
reputation, it's the
no,
town's
that's
credit
fair.
that they're banking on, right? So I'm not crazy about that idea, I guess.
Right, exactly, and who
I don't think
controls-
we've done enough research to know the answer even to that
Right.
question.
Right, but I guess
yeah,
what I'm
I
worried
understand.
about is if we constitute it and they decide, then we
Right.
have, yeah. Like, so we have to make this not tonight, but generally speaking, I think we have to think through this before we do the changes that we're discussing to the Constitution.
It's a question if I'm right.
Yeah, can I make a comment? We have Shelley Gorin on the Zoom. She's the state specialist on affordable housing trusts. And if you have a question that the league can't answer, she's going to be able to answer it. So for example, there are many towns that lend money very successfully and get their money back and then can lend it again. And she knows more about that than we do, because we didn't have a town that we studied 12 towns. We didn't have a town that lended money, but other towns do, and so she's available.
Okay,
I might also wonder if it makes sense to include an article here that talks about reporting from this. I don't remember reading that, but I wonder if that might be a requirement that there be some
Annual
reporting to the town from the trust.
can I ask a high level question? This is my first meeting at the Affordable Housing Trust, so maybe it's just because I haven't done this before. Is the goal of the Affordable Housing Trust to be a funding mechanism, a policy board, or both?
I think it's both for the long term. That would be my read.
Yeah,
So
I think it's-
the purpose is to provide for the preservation and creation of affordable housing in the town of Needham for the benefit of low and moderate income households. So it's pretty broad.
And we're suggesting on the guidance of the housing plan that perhaps it needs to be more than that anyway,
We're more robust.
more robust, have more,
Right now, we're doing
mechanisms that-
grants, small grants.
yeah,
And
right.
it's like, okay, is there an option?
If I may,
But
I
also
think.
monitoring.
I think that to sort of ease our way into the housing trust, the board, the entire board is the trust, so that solves the. Pardon the the trust in the trust.
Yeah.
But the board is unable to, it's just impossible for the board, plus Avier and me, to move forward these priorities because of the vast amount of work that you have in front of you. So this is, I think, the tension here that
Right.
the league raises, and it's a good tension between how do you make sure that you feel that there's an accountability that's not lost, but also people who are dedicated to the work, who are gonna meet perhaps much more often and carry out.
Right. I know, amen, but I just wonder, residents, says, of Needham would be like, all right, but where's the control? What exactly? This thing is, we're creating an animal, where's this going? And how do we have control of it?
So how do we do the research that would get us these answers and strategies? Like, if we,
I think the staff will embark on.
it just seems very specialized. I mean, it sounds like we have, there are resources, I guess. Part of the reason that the Affordable Housing Trust has been, I think, not super active is because not only is the select board busy, but also the select board doesn't really have that kind of expertise. And it's just, it sounds like even that the staff is fabulous too, but it sounds like beyond the expertise of the staff as well. No?
Well, I mean, I don't think we've, other than reviewing the league's recommendations and offering our thoughts on it. The issues of, we hadn't been
Priority.
researching the issues of this accountability piece, which we can look at, and actually. Our expert may have, I mean, that is a question that we may want to ask, is like, how do other communities ensure that there's accountability there? Katie, did you?
I just want to add that, I guess I don't have the concern that we can't get the expertise needed to answer the questions that you all are raising. It's just a matter of what's your priorities and what are the other priorities? You know, when you do your goal setting in July, obviously there'll be a whole list, and then where does this fall on that list? So I think it's just a staff capacity, not that we can't have the expertise or find it where we need to answer these questions.
The trust could actually help us with a consultant too, if we needed to. We have in the ones of thousands.
Can I ask another question? When I looked at the proposed numbers, so affordable housing, development, and real estate, it sounds like it enables for the big projects, which is something that like the current composition really can't do. It's only small, but I don't want to lose sight of other small projects, because like the small repair grant is really valuable. Like, you know, promoting accessory dwelling units is really good, and that's kind of on a small scale. So I do think that it has to span all ranges of developments, not just, you know, big construction projects.
Well, and the big developments presume some significant money,
It does, and so.
which may or may not. Like we have the NHA, which is looking for more money, going forward. We'll see what happens with Charles River Center, but like the idea that there might be huge other additional bits of money, maybe. But it's not,
But small ones are good too.
small maybe is what we do. Just, I don't know, but
We're going to
I don't know how
study-
it'll all
it's-
shake out.
Yeah, it's like small, like house project, like small house project.
There were, when the trust first started, I think the league members can corroborate this, there were communities that would help buy down units to be affordable. So if you had like, I remember there was one in Sudbury where you could buy down a deed restriction on a small bungalow, but that's not, I mean, then in Needham, you'd be
That's
spending,
kind of, you
Yeah, and I
spend
think-
all your money on buying down.
Right, the
more
league's,
Yeah.
the league's report touches,
yeah,
but it's just not feasible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but if somebody wanted to donate their house, the trust is a willing recipient to it.
So, for example, maybe I just need to get my head around this. Like, let's take the Needham Housing Authority. So if we change the composition of this. And this is taking a more aggressive role, this housing trust, what role would they play? Right now, they're not, this board is not really playing a role in that, like the CPC votes the funds. you know, T-Chalk is overseeing it, like what would be the role of this Affordable Housing Trust in that, if any?
Advocacy maybe?
Obviously. Yeah, transferring money,
Oh, that's transferring monies.
Yeah. it'd be
Would
granted.
they? I mean, would the CPC give the money to the Affordable Housing Trust and would they, and then who would
Well,
make?
yeah,
the
that
decision?
sounds a little weird, a grant into a grant.
Like, then who makes the decision? I'm kind of going back to what you were saying, Heidi. Like, is it the CPC's decision? But then
It has to be, that'd be state law.
No, once,
No.
I'm sorry, once the CPC gives money to the trust has control over that money.
Yeah,
So the CPC, for example, can't loan anything, but they can give a grant to the trust, and then the trust can loan. So the trust has different abilities, and can do very, very small things or very large things, depending on how much money they have.
right,
So they can put out a request for a proposal, they can spend 50,000 or a couple $100,000 for a gap funding for the NHA, for example.
Mhm.
So it can be small or it can be large, and it really depends on how much money is available and what the goals are.
And one of the things we are researching is, whether and to what extent the CPC and town meeting can condition what the trust does with the money when it goes in. I think there is some ability because if, you know, if the CPC just gives it to the trust with the intent that they want to loan it to someone,
Yeah,
you
there's a
know,
little-
so.
It's a
yes.
little squishy, right? Cause like tomorrow night, town meeting's gonna vote on these CPC grants and that is democratic accountability, right? I mean, town meeting gets to
But in
look
the
at those and
future,
decide.
they could make a different decision, and it's saying that the town meeting vote would be to give X dollars to the Affordable Housing Trust. That would be the vote that goes
Right,
to
but
town
then,
meeting.
does town meeting lose control over what the trust does with that money?
That's
some of
why
the
I said
research we
the
have to
question
do.
is, we need to understand or what the
think there's a
reporting
way
is
to
or how that
condition.
works.
right, and you
So-
can't amend CBC, stop.
No,
There are some rules, so the CPC money can't go for anything over 100% of AMI, area median income. So but the trust could do something for workforce housing that could go over 100%, but the CPC money can't be used for that. So there are some definite barriers,
So it sounds
but
like.
not very many.
Yeah, sounds to me like the decision we have to make is whether prioritizing a switch of this nature is what we want to do for our goals. So that we can prioritize that for the staff.
Yeah.
Allow them to educate us so that we can make the decisions that would make this thing go.
I feel like we all need to know more, you know, to figure out how we would. I mean, the lending opportunity is an important one that I think we all want to prioritize, but we also care about accountability.
if it were, well, I guess this is part of the research, like in your example, town meeting said, you know, approve the CPC granting money to the Affordable Housing Trust for the purpose of loaning to this entity.
Right, then that would be, right, if you could do that, then that's.
No,
Like,
CPC would have had to have written that in the grant, right? Because town meeting can't modify.
Right, no, but assuming CPC did,
Yeah, so right, yeah.
yeah, that's
Okay.
just so that.
Yeah.
But
So
town
that
meeting
we're
is
not
up.
giving a blank check to the trust.
Right.
Right, that it's for a purpose that town meeting can vote on and can know what their money is exactly being used for.
I did see a grant agreement that did that, but it wasn't signed and, you know, I haven't done any more research to see if it worked out. Because one of the things that we were trying to figure out is if it goes to the trust with the explicit purpose of lending it to X, and then that doesn't happen, how does it get back? So, if it needs to get back. So these are the unanswered questions about the finances.
So is the challenge that this document asks us to make a leap now to give up control when we don't have any of those answers? Right, that's the issue.
I want answers first.
Well, yeah. So
can
the
I be-
decision that we have to make is just to give,
To go, yeah.
to prioritize this.
I feel like a fly in the ointment here, but some towns just give money and, so that trust can do something quickly. So for example, if Charles River didn't buy Militia Heights, that property,
Yeah,
the trust and somebody was selling it and they wanted a buyer now and they didn't want to wait a year until, the cycle happened again. That one of the recommendations for the league was to have a certain amount of money in the fund so that it could be done, something could be done quickly. So let's say that Militia Heights, we lost it and it went to a private developer and look at the great, look at what's happening there. It's really a wonderful, wonderful project. So the trust actually may have been the best avenue to get land like that. And, the oversight may come later if you want to bounce the people off the board because you don't like them. But I think there needs to be a certain amount of trust in the board, right? For something like that, an opportunity that doesn't come along very often.
Yeah, I just wonder how town meeting members would feel about not getting a say-so on a purchase like that.
Well, if the trust was buying it for the town meeting has to vote, that's a law. But they could have helped another, like a affordable housing developer buy it, but they can't buy it for town ownership. Well, I can't imagine a scenario, because town meeting has to approve any acquisition that is gonna be held in view at town.
Yeah, let's see.
Okay, well, clearly there's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we could discuss all the things that we don't know for quite some time, but.
Well, it is helpful for us to, your questions are really helpful to figure out what we need to look at.
Yeah, so we're not making a decision now on this, but this will be part of our goals conversation. Not only the constitution of the trust, but also what the trust can do, i.e. loaning. So is there anything that we need to discuss before we move off of what we need to learn?
So I'm gonna ask a interim question, I guess, as I'm thinking about this. If we are going forward with our affordable housing trust, relatively constituted as it is now for the moment, and it's a priority to learn some of these things, is there some skill set that would be helpful to add to the trust? That we think about a modification to the trust, just to go forward for another year or something to to figure out what the questions are. Is there a skill set that we could find? Do we think we could locate that person?
There's, the Mass Housing Partnership actually has a program where they'll take the board and help you learn everything you need to learn, including developing your plan for your unique situation. And lots of towns are utilizing that. And Shelley is the person who runs that program.
So
Right, field trip.
would it be, well, we can schedule another meeting.
Yeah, it's usually is that work done with the trust though, or is that done with? I mean, the trust as constituted currently is not the trust that we hope it will be, so we, it's just like chicken and egg kind of situation. We would like to give this responsibility ultimately to others who have more expertise, but not until
Yeah.
we outline the boundaries and controls that we feel comfortable with.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
think
the
that
question.
group would be the group that would be able to use the Mass Housing Partnership.
Yeah, because creating the work plan is one thing, but creating the trust is a different thing. And I think we have to do that first.
Did you put people on Zoom? Did you want to?
I'd ask Shelley what she has to say, if you don't mind.
Shelley, I'm bringing you over as a
Oh, no.
No, I think it's coming back.
Hey, Shelley.
Hey,
Oh, okay. Have you been able to
Good.
hear us this whole time?
yes.
Thank goodness. Okay. Just, we had a little owl freak out.
Yeah.
So welcome and thank you for joining us. I guess we've been, as you've been hearing, I hope, discussing the chicken and egg sort of feeling that we have about reconstituting trust and how that might work. And we understand that you have some expertise that you could potentially share with us, either today or in brief, and then another time, sort of more expansively.
Yeah. So what I was actually emailing Janice, what I do in a lot of communities is I can do like a trust 101 kind of session to answer. So I've been taking a lot of notes of the kind of questions that you have. A lot of them have not too complicated of answers, and I can give examples in other communities. So I could do something like that where it's all of you are invited and anyone else is invited. My preference would be a virtual option, but we could talk about that later. But so that could help you as you're thinking about reconstituting the trust and what it looks like, and then also your process moving forward. So I'd be happy to do that, just to kind of answer a bunch of stuff at once and to give examples of other communities. I know that the league has done some of that for you, but I'm happy to build on that. And then as you are thinking about a work plan, I'm in the last few years, I've been doing a lot of pushing trust to create some kind of path forward, to take some time to do a bit of planning. It doesn't have to be extensive, but to create really measurable goals. I'm really pushing measurable goals because a lot of our housing goals can be really general and big, and that's hard to figure out where to start. So some measurable goals and strategies that follow the goals. And I would suggest that you wait to do that until new trustees are appointed, because you really want the board to be um, feel invested in the work. And if someone else hands it to them, then it can be harder to feel like you're reflected in that plan. So I would suggest that you first figure out who's going to be on the trust and appoint the new trustees, and then have them do a little bit of work. And I'm happy to assist to some degree. We do some intensive technical assistance. So right now, for example, I'm working with Concord, and they're a newer trust, and we're working on goals and strategies and helping them kind of fine tune how they're going to be working in the community and their investment in housing development versus some of their policy work. To the question that someone asked about, is it funding, is it policy? And many see both those as part of the role. So we absolutely will provide some support with the new trustees when they come on. I don't know how long you're wanting to stay in your meeting tonight, so I don't necessarily need to go through all of the different comments that I would have, but I'm happy to do what you would like to do at this point.
Thank you.
Shelley, do you have examples that we could look at that help us better understand the intersection or the interaction between CPC and the trust? Are there some good examples of that? And also, is there a good example that relates to this question of how reporting back to the community might work?
So I don't think that there's anything that's any kind of one pagers or anything that's written out. It's things like that a select board member has to be on the trust. And so there's that, given that leadership in the community is on the trust. We always encourage grant agreements between the CPC and any entity that they allocate funds to, and that includes the trust, even though the trust is a municipal board. So we would suggest that if the CPC decides to transfer money to the trust, that they have a grant agreement, that they clarify what the funds are for. And it's different in different communities. Some communities are fine with transferring funds to the trust for all eligible CPA purposes, and others are more restrictive on that. So it just depends on the community. But that would be in the grant agreement. There would be, like we would suggest in any grant agreement between the CPC and someone who's receiving funds, that there would be some language around when the funds should be returned to the CPC. So there's that accountability piece. And then we are always pushing trust to be reporting back to critical players in the community, the boards that are important. Sometimes that might be attending a CPC meeting more than just when you're wanting funds, to report back on kind of changes in needs locally, making sure that the CPC members understand the housing needs in the community, not assuming that CPC members know that. Sometimes the trusts will report to select board periodically, so attend meetings or having joint meetings. We have some communities like Concord where they have quarterly meetings among different, they have a round table, and so it's people that are engaged in housing, municipal and outside of the municipality, that are meeting quarterly to discuss the work of each of the groups, to talk about policy around housing, to move things forward across different entities, and the trust is actively engaged in supporting that. So there are different models to build in some accountability, and certainly in some communities, it's a bigger concern than others because the trust can allocate funds without it going to town meeting. But I think that there are ways to build in some accountability and expectation. If in your annual meeting, you have boards that are doing a write-up of like a summary of their work, we would suggest that the trust do that, just like any other board. And someone did bring up like a question about some trusts do have a CPC member on the trust board or a different board represented, and that is important in some communities. They do that because they think that that's critical. It can be difficult because a lot of people that sit on boards sit on multiple boards, and so you just want to make sure that you're not having the same people sit on too many boards, because you need the trust board members to really be active, and you want to be able to get a quorum at meetings. So it looks different in different communities, but I think that there are ways to address some of these concerns that are reasonable.
Thank you.
And I would just like to quickly point out that many allocations of funding for affordable housing development has to be structured as a loan, because funding sources like low-income housing tax credits, the federal tax credits, require it to be structured that way. And oftentimes it's no interest and forgivable, but it has to be structured as a loan. So that's really getting into the weeds of housing finance, and you don't really need that at this point. But just to put that on the table, that some of the funding that you allocate may have to be structured as a loan.
And cannot be counted on that it's coming back.
Well, with affordable housing, because there are typically gaps in that need to be filled, and local money is oftentimes that gap, then typically it would not come back. Typically, that's not always the case. Somerville and some Barnstable, they have some of their funds are structured as loans where it would come back to them, or where there would be a low, like a 1 or 2% interest on the loan. So that is possible. But even in Somerville, like if it's deeply affordable units, then they won't do that. They'll structure it where it's forgivable and there's no interest rate. So it can depend on the deal, that some are more able to be paid back, and sometimes pre-development funds are expected, like Barnstable the trust has a program where when it's pre-development work, then they expect it to be paid off with the permanent loan for the development. So there are certainly ways to do that. I think that you just want to be a little bit flexible, because some deals are, affordable housing is expensive, and there just aren't enough public resources to fill some of the gaps, because when you have low rents, then you just don't have the same kind of operating income. They can't take on the same kind of debt that a market rate development can. So there needs to be public resources to plug kind of the holes. But that's really getting into the weeds at this point. I think that's what you'd want to do when you're getting more into your goals and how you're going to structure how you function as a trust. I think it's something definitely you want to think about, but I don't think you really need to get too much in the weeds right now.
I wonder if we'll have the same sort of potential conflict issues with an affordable housing trust that we've had on some other committee appointments.
I do think that the gracious offer to do a trust 101 as you know, maybe one of your
Yeah.
first, your next steps, seems like a really good idea.
That sounds like a great idea. Thank you for the offer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And so I've written down a lot of the kind of questions. You could also, we could consult beforehand to make sure that I'm covering the kind of material that you want to cover, and I can have on even some slides, just like examples of some of the goals and strategies that other trusts have created, just to give you an idea of how some other trusts are positioning themselves in their community. And we can look at mission statements a little bit too, if that's helpful. Happy to do some of that.
Excellent. I appreciate your assistance and yours very much. Okay, so, any other thoughts before we? I mean, I'm not sure how much further we want to take this conversation before we either.
How
Ms.
long
Shelley,
do we
or-
need to plan for a Trust 101? How long is that session?
So I think if you could give me about 45 minutes for material, 30 to 45 minutes for material, probably 45 would be safer, and then Q&A kind of time. So like if
Okay.
it's at least an hour and 15 minutes, maybe
Great.
more
I
if
just
you
know how
want, but
hard it was to get this meeting or
Yeah.
goals meeting done, just asking.
It may be a little
Thank
ways
you.
out, Shelley, but we'll definitely plan it. Thank you.
I mean, if you want to do a shorter thing at your next meeting where it's just kind of going through some of the discussion tonight, some of the questions, I could do that, and we could then plan kind of a bigger thing. So just let me know. Happy to help.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, I guess I'd just love to say, thank you not only to Shelley, but also to the league who put so much time and effort into their, study. And I know the whole committee isn't here, but, we appreciate your efforts and are taking it to heart for sure.
Really got it moving,
Yeah,
honestly.
absolutely.
So it sounds like we need a meeting sooner than a year, right?
Well, I mean, it really will depend on when your goal setting is July, we could
July 26th.
right, where, where this is, and if it's near the top, then.
And I would just say, for all of us in this room, separate but related, we probably need to figure out what we're taking off the goals list as opposed to what we're adding, but
Yeah,
we'll deal with that another day.
yeah. I mean, it does seem like this could assist a bunch of areas in town. I mean, not physical areas, but like it could take something off of the plate of the CPC. It could take something off of the plate of the select board. And so,
If the
Would-
group
would
built
be-
in expertise.
yes.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it would be, I think, an efficiency factor as well as a force for good potentially in the town.
Yeah, I'm eager to discuss this at the goals section, because I guess I don't, in my head, understand whether the Affordable Housing Trust is meant to like supplement what the town does or replace what the town does.
I think probably both.
We'll say add.
I think it's additive, but I think it's a shifting and adding.
But having like a responsible agency that takes,
This part.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think right now, it's a lot of our monitoring, no offense, but like, you're only one person, you know, it's. Not gonna say that, but like, I think a lot of it can be kind of piecemeal and a low priority. So having it be someone's priority would be great. You know, we could make more progress.
Well, and if there is a group that's focused on it, then the questions that come up, somebody would be more attuned and on top of where the state of the art is for affordable housing than what we have right now.
Definitely. All right. Anything else from anyone else? In that case, perhaps a motion? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.